This morning is one of those mornings where I almost feel like I don't have to preach my message because God has been speaking it powerfully to us as we've been singing. Isn't it so good to come and enter into his presence, hear him speak to us through one another? But even though I do feel like it's been preached already, why not preach it a second time, hey? We want to hear God speak. We believe he speaks to us so powerfully also through this book, the Bible. And so if you're joining us for the first time this morning, my name's Simon. I'm one of the leaders and elders here, and we're working at the moment through Mark's Gospel, the series which we've called Behold Your King. We're looking at this eyewitness account of Jesus' life and asking, how does this show us more about this king that we follow or are looking into following? And just because today this passage is going to lead us into some complex, heavy topics, I want to read it for us right away so we have plenty of time. So if you have a Bible, please do turn to Mark 5. If not, the words will come up on the screen and I'll just be reading the first 20 verses from the CSB translation. This is what it says. They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes, and as soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. That's Jesus. He lived in the tombs, and no one was able to restrain this man anymore, not even with a chain, because he had often been bound with chains and shackles, but had torn the chains apart and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him. And he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me." For he had told him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" Jesus asked him. "My name is Legion," he answered him, "because we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. Now a large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside. And the demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them." And so he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs. And the herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. And the men who tended them ran off and reported it in the town and the countryside. And people went to see what had happened. And they came to see Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told them about the pigs. And then they began to beg him to leave their region. And as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with him. But Jesus did not let him, but told him, "Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So he went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. Okay, so in this passage, we are witnessing Jesus encounter what I imagine we would call spiritual evil. So far in Mark's Gospel, we've seen Jesus encounter natural evil in diseases and in storms that he's stilled. We've also seen him, I guess, encounter human evil when he's forgiven people of their sins. But here, we see a man who we're told is possessed by an unclean spirit, which actually turn out to be many spirits. And later on in the passage, we're given in no uncertain terms the fact that this man is demon-possessed. And I imagine that sort of language, as soon as we hear that, will cause a degree of skepticism in many of us. Because you think, really? Demon possession? Do we believe in that sort of stuff? Isn't that just stuff that belongs in movies and maybe people in the ancient world believed it? But haven't we moved on from that now, Simon? Maybe we might think, what's really going on here is this is just a case of a man with a severe mental health disorder. but who these ancient villagers, in their ignorance and lack of understanding, because they don't really know what's going on, they just diagnose it as a demon because they don't know what to do with it. But I think if that's our view of this passage, we should be quick, or not so quick, to make those judgments, really. Because, well, firstly, there's a detail in the passage which I think would stop us going there. In verses 3 and 4, we're given the detail that this man has a sort of superhuman strength to him. You know, they tried to chain him and shackle him down. These were things that they would do to wild animals to keep them bound. And yet this man has this superhuman strength so that he's able to break out of them, which surely alerts us to the fact that what is going on here is more than just a physical or mental disorder. No, this is something deeper. This is something spiritual. And even more broadly than that, I think we should not dismiss this story so quickly, because surely we have to say that even with all of our progress and understanding in 2022, even with all of our understanding of how the world works, how the human mind works, I think it's still the case that when faced with real evil in our world, we're still not totally sure how to explain it. You know, we still don't have adequate resources available to us to explain why there is such pervasive evil, why there is such darkness in our world. You know, I think maybe this is the reason why when we look at our world and see great atrocities, like those committed in the 20th century or those even on our TV screens right now, we often find ourselves resorting to almost supernatural language to describe it. You know, we'll talk about leaders as being monstrous or inhuman. We'll talk about their plans as being like beastly, or we'll even use the term diabolical, which just means devilish, to describe these things. We kind of reach for this superhuman language. Why? Well, I wonder if it's because still deep down we have this lingering sense that the evil we see in our world can't just be explained in naturalistic human terms. We have this sense that there is something more to it. There's kind of a deeper reality, almost a personality to it that grips us, grips our world. And actually, the Bible would, of course, tell us that we have this suspicion because that is actually the case. 1 John 5 verse 19, the Apostle John, one of Jesus' followers, says that the whole world lies under the sway, lies under the power of the evil one. And in that short verse, John is actually articulating a teaching found throughout the Bible that there is a spiritual being in our world. Sometimes he's called Satan or the devil. Sometimes he's just referred to as the enemy or the evil one. There is a spiritual being whose entire goal is to destroy God's world and to destroy the goodness of it. He is evil because he wants evil to reign, and he wants to destroy the goodness God's placed in this world. And the Bible tells us in no uncertain terms that he will use whatever means available to him to do that. He'll use sin, he'll use temptation, he'll even use demons, sort of fallen angels, to achieve this. The Bible makes very clear there is more going on in our world that we can't see. There are powers at work that are not available just to see through normal human perception. So we shouldn't dismiss this so quickly. But it might be that your kind of reservation coming to this passage is not so much that you don't believe in the reality of spiritual powers. It may be that you do believe in those things, but rather you just don't seem to have this sort of experience in your life ever, this kind of encounter with blatant spiritual evil. And I'd put my hand up and say I would place myself firmly in that category. You know, I've been a Christian for many years, and I've been in church literally my whole life. And yet I don't think I could ever point you to an encounter remotely like the one we see here in this story, an encounter with a demon, with a real element of spiritual evil. Now, to be clear, there are people in my life and people even in this church who would say they have had these sorts of encounters. And I have just no reason to distrust them. I believe them when they tell me that. But even still, I don't think those people in my life would say that this sort of encounter is kind of regular Christian experience for them. You know, for some reason, I'm sure it'd be fascinating to go into, but for some reason it seems like the enemy doesn't seem to work in these kind of overt, dramatic ways, in the ways he seemed to used to in the life of Jesus. His tactics seem more covert. He doesn't go for this kind of dramatic show of power. But even with that said, I don't think that means that we have to treat this passage as irrelevant or only relevant in kind of special circumstances when we have this sort of encounter. Because actually, I think if we look closely at what is going on in this passage, if we look at the effects of the enemy, the effects of these demons on this man and their goal with him, what I think we'll see is that actually still in our world today, even if it doesn't come in dramatic ways like this, we can actually still see elements of the enemy's work and purpose being worked out in our world today. I'll show you what I mean by this. I just want to turn back to the passage now and see two impacts that these demons had on this man as they possessed him. The first impact we see is that these demons were all about dehumanizing this man. Their goal seems to have been to so possess him that they kind of strip him of his personality and almost turn him into a kind of like subhuman creature. You see this firstly in verses 3 and 4 that we've looked at already, that they've made this man into almost like a wild animal, a beast-like figure with strength not common to humans. And actually, you see this theme kind of worked out later when in verse 15 you realize that this man, for the whole time in this story, has been naked up until the point when Jesus has dealt with him. You kind of get this image of this like wild beast-like figure roaming the wilderness. They've dehumanized him. And more than that, whenever this man speaks, you get this weird dynamic that whenever he speaks, it's not really his voice you're hearing, but it's the voice of these demons. They say, "We are legion, we are many." They strip this man of his personality. They've dehumanized him. That's the first thing they do with this man. But it's not just that. They don't just lead him away from his humanity. They also lead him, I think, away from life. Second goal of these demons is to lead this man into a life that more resembles death. You see this in verse 3, where we're told that this man lives amongst tombs, the place of the dead. See in verse 5 that he has been cutting himself with stones. And I think the evil intent of these demons with this man is seen most clearly when Jesus sends them into the pigs. And what is the first thing they do when they get control of this herd of pigs? They send them hurtling down a mountain into the sea to drown them. They bring about death. It's the two effects of the enemy's work, of these demons on this man's life. They dehumanize him, strip him of his personality, and they also more and more strip him of his life and everything that involves. And I think when you boil down the enemy's work to these two primary traits, dehumanization and death, I think it's not hard to see that even if we never have an encounter like this one, that the enemy can still be very much at work in our world just through other means, more covert means. You know, I might think about how the prevalence of addictive substances or addictive behaviors in our world can often so grip a person's life that it's almost like they're stripped of who they are. They become less and less of who they were because these things begin to take control. We might think of how in our world today, forces of radicalization or forces of rampant nationalism can so grip an individual or grip an entire nation which just leads to the needless loss of life. You think, what is driving that? It's leading to death. Or even closer to home, I think of ways that things like technology and social media, things that are not bad in themselves, but they can be used to almost dehumanize us, strip us of who we are. We go from being kind of rounded individuals with relationships into people who are just slaves to notifications, slaves to our screens. We might think of ways in which work, consumerism, careerism, just the stresses of life can often so press in on us that they're strangling us. They strip us of our freedom, strip us of our joy, and it's almost like we say, my soul's under attack. I don't feel like I'm living anymore. I feel like I'm just existing. I'm losing who I am. It may well be true that the enemy does not work in dramatic, showy ways as much as he might seem to have done back then. But friends, we must not be ignorant of the enemy's schemes. He is still active in our world today. Right from the beginning, his plan continues to strip humans of their life and lead them into death. And it may be that you are here this morning, as I think the words we've heard would suggest, that maybe some of us here who really feel this today. Maybe you would say that right now, it's just like there's a storm in your heart that you can't still. Just kind of raging emotions or rampant bitterness or unforgiveness, fears, worries. Like these things are so powerful. They're just raging in your heart. And it's like whatever I do, I can't stop them. They're strangling me. They're constricting me. I don't feel like a person anymore. Or maybe it's not things going on in your heart, but it's kind of pressures in the world, circumstances weighing down on you so much. Like I feel like I'm just moving from A to B to C, not really living, just existing. Or maybe you would be here this morning and you would say, I don't know how to put it in words, but I just feel like there is evil weighing down upon me. Just feel a heaviness, just feel a weight on me. Maybe it's not in your life, maybe it's in your family's life. You just sense darkness reigning, or you look in the world and you just see just hopelessness. If we live in a world that is under the power of the evil one, we will have times when we just feel like we're up against forces too strong for us, storms too fearsome for us to deal with. But when we find ourselves in that place, against forces too strong for us, what we need is someone who is stronger even than those forces. When we find ourselves up against strong opposition, we need someone who is stronger still than all the evil that this world could ever throw at us. And that is exactly who Mark wants to present to us in the person of Jesus. So we move on through this message now. I just want to see two ways in which Mark shows us Jesus' unrivaled authority over darkness and evil in our world. And then just see two questions that Mark wants us to ask in response as we see Jesus as this king with authority over evil. So firstly, let's just look back to the passage now and see, how does Mark show us Jesus' utter authority over evil? Well, firstly, we see it in the cowering stance that these evil spirits must take towards Jesus. In verse 6, it says that when this demon-possessed man saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him. Remember who this man was. These demons had turned into like a wild beast that no one could tame. No one could subdue him. He was like a fearsome lion roaming in the wilderness. All these villagers could do was just get him out of there. They couldn't deal with him. He was just roaring, fearsome. And yet as soon as he sees Jesus, he becomes like a submissive pet. It's like kneeling down before him. This terrifying lion becomes this, golden Labrador, just kind of panting at Jesus, kneeling at him, fearing him. Jesus has utter authority over the evil in this world. He turns a fearsome lion into a submissive pet. But more than that, you see this not just in the stance that these spirits take before Jesus, but also in the speech that they utter towards him. In verse 7, the next verse, we see that the man cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, before God, do not torment me." These spirits who have been in this man's life calling the shots, they've been the authority. They've been like a legion just coming in and taking over. And these villagers can't do anything. They just have to let it be. But as soon as they meet Jesus, this king with authority, their language goes from authoritative commands to begging him for mercy. They know they're in the presence of someone they can't defeat, and so they just resorted to begging. And every time you speak from then on, verse 7, verse 10, and verse 12, it's always said that they're begging Jesus, fearing him. And this authority is ultimately shown in the detail given in verse 13, which I love, that says that Jesus, when he cast them into the pigs, it says that he gave them permission to go. It's like they can't even choose to leave this man by themselves, but he must give them permission. This is what Mark wants us to see of Jesus this morning, that he is someone with absolute, unrivaled authority over every evil force in our world. Nothing can stop him. It's not even a contest. Mark wants us to see that Jesus is the king who has come to deal with all the darkness we see in our world and undo the effects of the evil one. He undoes all the dehumanization and all the death that the enemy has brought into this man's life. So that in verse 15, you see that they come to Jesus and see the man who had been demon-possessed, and now we see that he is sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. Elsewhere in the Bible, the Apostle John will tell us that Jesus came to destroy the works of the evil one and make us right with God. And ultimately, this is a theme that we see brought to its fullness, not in this story, but at the end of Jesus' life, when he deals with evil completely at the cross. You see, Jesus dealt with the evil in this man's life here by speaking to him, commanding the spirits to come out. But at the end of his life, we'll see Jesus defeat evil by seemingly being defeated by it. See, this man, we meet him naked and alone, crying out in the wilderness, his body cut to shreds from stones and oppressed by a spirit called Legion. But at the end of Jesus' life on the cross, we will see him naked, alone, crying out to his Father, his body cut to shreds as he was executed by literal legions. Jesus, at the end of his life, he entered into this man's evil. He entered into darkness, but also that he could defeat it totally. So that 3 days later, he could rise out of the grave and declare victory over all the enemy's works. So that not just this man, but every one of us who come to him can know authority, can know victory over the enemy's work in our lives, and can increasingly know freedom that we've been singing and hearing about today. This is who Mark wants us to see Jesus as, someone with authority, someone who brings freedom over all the darkness in your life. But he doesn't just leave us there with that statement of who Jesus is, because he knows that if we hear that message, that we must respond to it, that there must be some way that we apply that to our life, live with this king of authority. And so before he finishes, he gives us two exchanges with two different people and with Jesus, which I think cause us to ask questions about how we respond to this Jesus, this king with authority. I think that the first question Mark wants us to ask at the end of this passage is this: will you let the king into your life? You've seen who this king is, this king with authority. Mark says, will you let him in? See, at the end of verse 15, these villagers have seen this man and all that Jesus has done for him. They've seen that he's totally restored him. But then you get this detail, right at the end, it says, and they were afraid. Which I think initially is a good response to have to this Jesus we've just seen. There's been this evil lurking in their midst that no one could deal with. Not even the strongest people in their village could deal with this evil. And yet Jesus comes in and with a few words, it is done. It is restored completely. So rightly they're afraid. Rightly we should be fearing who this Jesus is. But the tragic thing is that their fear leads them to make a very tragic decision, which comes in verse 17. It says, then they began to beg Jesus to leave. These people start off well. They see that Jesus is a king with authority. They see that if wherever he goes, he encounters evil, he deals with it completely. But there's something in them that says, but it is risky to have him around, isn't it? They think, oh, thanks so much, Jesus, for dealing with this evil in this man's life. But we don't really want you to stay with us because, well, if you keep doing that, if you keep bringing goodness and keep restoring it, if you get into the darkness in my heart, I don't know what could happen. I don't know how you might change me. You totally transform this man's life, which is great, but I'm kind of happy how I am. I don't want things to change too much. Don't want you to shake up the status quo. And so they come to Jesus and say, thanks very much for dealing with this, but could you leave now? They beg him to leave. And it might seem strange. They just seen Jesus do this incredible act of deliverance. Then they ask him to go. But actually, I think it's something that we can very often do in our lives too. We will give Jesus some access to our life. We'll say, yeah, deal with my sin, deal with this problem, but I don't want you to take the whole of my life. I don't want you to come into everything. I don't want you to come to all the dark crevices of my heart because, well, I don't know what you might do if you get there. I don't know how you might change me. Or we say, yeah, Jesus, you can have part of our church life. You can have lordship over some of it, but we don't want you to transform us completely because we might be shaken up by that. You might do stuff we're not comfortable with. And so we give Jesus a bit of our life, but we really treat him at arm's length. Maybe we come to church and we investigate him, but we're not sure about giving him our life because we know he's going to change us. Or we do come to Jesus, we do let him have our life, but we say, don't get into this darkness because I'm happy with how it is. Even though we know that whatever he does is good. Even though we know that he is a king that only brings goodness, we're fearful of what it might mean. But I think Mark holds up this story as these villagers who ask Jesus to leave, as if to say, are you sure you want to make that decision? Because what happens right after, in verse 18, we see Jesus obeys their request. Verse 17, it says they beg him to leave their region. Verse 18, we see Jesus getting in the boat to leave. He says, okay, if you don't want me, I'll leave. Mark says, are you sure? You've seen what Jesus can do. You've seen how he can transform a broken heart. Are you sure you don't want to let him in? Elsewhere, we read that Jesus is a king who doesn't bruise a broken reed, doesn't snuff out a smouldering wick. When he comes in, he is full of power and goodness, yes, but he's also gentle and kind. If you let Jesus into your life, let him into the darkest parts of your heart, you have nothing to fear. He is a good doctor, a good surgeon who only does good to his patients. So maybe this morning as we finish and in a few moments have time to sing and respond, maybe you just want to actually open up some parts of your heart to Jesus that you haven't done before and say, Jesus, would you do your good work there? I want to let you in. Would you come and bring your light to my darkness? It might be that you don't just want to pray on your own, but you need to grab someone to pray with. And I'd encourage you to do that here if you'd like to, or if you'd like to do it a bit more privately, why don't you take that time just to text someone and say, we need to meet this week. Can we talk through some things? The first question Mark asks us at the end of this story is, will you let this king in to do his good work? Not just in this man's life, but in your life too. But there's also a second question which Mark wants us to ask briefly, which is this. Not just will you let the king in, but will you let this king send you out? Verse 18, we get the final exchange where it says that as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begs him earnestly that he might remain with him. Again, I think a good start from this man as he sees who Jesus is. He's like, Jesus is someone who brings transformation, he brings life. I want to stick with him. I want his life to flood into my life. And of course, this is a good response because Jesus himself will tell his disciples later at the Last Supper, he'll tell them the importance of abiding with him, of remaining with him, of doing their whole life from that point on with him. But although I'm sure Jesus wanted that for this man, this kind of life of living, abiding in Jesus, the way that was going to look for this man was not kind of sticking in Jesus' holy huddle. It wasn't going to look like just going with the disciples and sticking by Jesus. No. Jesus says in verse 19, it says he does not let him remain with him, but instead he said, go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. It's like Jesus is saying to this man, yes, I've brought you life. Yes, I have brought light into your darkness and freedom from your captivity, but don't forget where you came from. Don't forget that the people in your town who have just rejected me, they are still in need of light. They might not know it and they want me to get out, but he says, they still need my life, and so you need to go back there and tell them about me. And I think this is a really important point for us to grasp from Jesus, because the thing is, this church is a wonderful church. The thing about ALC is that we are a place, I believe, where God dwells. And that means that there is so much encouragement, so much support here. I love being here because I get so encouraged, so built up by each one of us. And I'm sure you've experienced that. You just say, this is a place of life, it's a place of light, it's a place where God dwells, where we can encourage one another, it's a place where we feel safe. But although this is a huge blessing that God has given us as a church, we must be careful that it doesn't become our downfall, in that it means we never really go out into the world. Because what we can do is we can think, I've got such good friends at church. I've got such a good community that builds me up here. Why would I ever want to be friends with those in my workplace who don't know Jesus and might not build me up? Why would I want to get to know my non-Christian neighbours, friends and family who just don't make me feel as safe and secure? They don't speak to me about Jesus as they do at church. The thing is, friends, although this is a place of light where God dwells, there are still places of darkness in our world that need us to point them to Jesus. For some of us, this might mean literally at some point moving out into places of darkness, moving into neighborhoods where there aren't many Christians, or maybe even moving into neighboring towns, villages, churches to start or support churches that are reaching out to these places. Sometimes Jesus will call us to move out, to move on, to share his light with others. But for many of us, I guess it might not mean literally moving out, but it might just mean moving deeper in to the communities where we are. Not just kind of living there and doing all our life in church and with Christians, but really moving in, investing in relationships, being a present light in our community. It's what Jesus wants for us. He wants to bring us into light, but then so that he can, through us, shine his light to others. And so Mark says, will you let this king in, number one? But number two, will you let this king send you out? Are there places of darkness which he is saying, I want you to go there, my son or my daughter, my brother, my sister, to go and bring my light to these places? So just as we finish, and the band comes back up, I'd love them to lead us, not by singing with us straight away, but we're just going to have some time. The band are just going to play very softly. And I'm just going to give us a few moments. Maybe we just want to stand before our King right now and just ask Jesus, are there ways in which you want to come and deal with my heart even more? And are there places that you want to send me? And maybe this is a time when you want to grab someone to pray, or you just want to spend some time with Jesus on your own. But why don't we just stand now? I'll just lead us in prayer as we come to respond to this King. Jesus, we thank you so much. You're a King with authority over darkness. Thank you. There is nothing lurking in our hearts right now that you cannot deal with. And we pray as we come to you, would you bring your healing power to those things? We thank you also that there is no darkness on our world that you cannot overcome. We pray, would you right now give us the faith to go where you are calling us to go as we worship you in your name. Amen. Let's just take some time now to reflect on these things with Jesus.